All right, so let's talk about goal setting and specifically SMART goals. SMART is an acronym for a method of developing goals. We're going to use this method in this class. I think it's great. We're also going to be a little critical of it and talk about some of the pitfalls of SMART goals. So let's take a look at today's objectives. We're going to revisit these objectives at the end of this lecture and at the end of this module, but I want you to take a look at them. They're up on the screen. At the end, you can kind of do a self-evaluation to make sure that you feel comfortable reaching each of these objectives. So here's a quote from Zig Ziglar. He's a great kind of organizational speaker, and I think this is something we can keep in the forefront of our minds as we move through this process. So why do we put together goals? Why do we do goal setting? I think when we start looking at the process of putting them together, when we start out, we need to think of an issue. We need to think of a problem or a challenge that is facing us. And I think there's some ways that people can maybe misconstrue what that problem is. Here are some examples. So if you have a low grade in the class, that might be a challenge or an issue that you want to overcome. Well, is it the teacher's fault or is it a lack of effort on your part? Or if your challenge is or your issue is that you're bored, well, is it too much TV time or is there an easier option like joining a club or organization? So thinking about the challenge, thinking about the issue is a great place to start. For this class, what we're going to do is we're going to think of a topic for your website. That's going to be kind of our first thing, and an issue or something that you want to change or achieve might be the place that you start out. So obviously it's important to get these goals written down somewhere. You need to revisit them often. They need to be accessible to you. And so if we kind of flesh out what the steps from beginning to end are going to look like, writing down your goals, creating action steps, and developing target dates are super important. And when we start thinking about what are these goals going to look like, they typically will have a positive vibe to them. They'll be action oriented. You'll see statements begin with I can or I will. Those are things that you're going to see most often to start out your goals. And I want you to think about stretching your abilities. When we talk about SMART goals and that aspect, some critics say that if you use SMART goals as a methodology, that it can kind of stifle your ability to grow. But we'll take a look at that here in a little bit. So this is another method that you can use. This is aside from the SMART goals method. The GCAT is kind of fleshing things out a little bit more. So your goal, ask yourself, what do I want? Write down the goal, write down what you would like to achieve. And you can see we move through those 4 steps until we get to the last one, which is a target date. And you have to ask yourself, when do you want it by? And so I think this is a great place to start. If you prefer this method, you can definitely use it outside of class. But for in our class, we are going to use the SMART goals method. So like I said, SMART goals, SMART is an acronym, stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. If you take a look at the GCAT method or some of the aspects that we have discussed previously, you'll see that everything has a target date. And so that's where time-bound comes in. And then one thing that I really like about SMART goals is how much emphasis it puts on measurability. So knowing, did you meet that goal? So when we talk about the SMART goal acronym, achievability comes into question. Um, you have to ask yourself, is it achievable? And I think this is the biggest criticism. So I don't want you to get bogged down by that achievability. Do remember that in this class, you might be just learning how to put together a website. And we do have 2 weeks between the final date where you have to accomplish your goals and your launch date. So keep those in mind. But I still want you to grow, push yourself, and there's always a room to find success in failures. So revisit these goals one more, or these objectives one more time. We're going to discuss a little bit more in detail in the next video about SMART goals. But this is a good place for you to kind of take a second, feel like you have been able to get a small introduction to these objectives. And what's next? Definitely take a look at WT class. There are some great examples of goals, what they need to look like before you turn them in, and ways to ensure that your goals are smart. And we're also going to talk about your roadmap to success. So those are writing down your goals, figuring out how you're going to measure success, and setting target dates.